The elevator opened on the 42nd floor and the hostess stepped forward. Before he had fully cleared the doors, she did it with the practiced efficiency of someone whose job was to manage arrivals before. Arrivals became situations, and she positioned herself with the specific geometry of a person who was there to intercept rather than welcome. Her tablet held at the angle of someone ready to consult a list and find a name absent from it. "Good evening," she said. "Do you have a reservation with us tonight?" The man stepping out of the elevator was wearing a dark gray jacket over a black shirt, dark trousers, and shoes that were good but said nothing about themselves. He was in his early 40s, broad through the shoulders, with the kind of face that had been shaped by decisions made over a long time, rather than by anything circumstantial. Beside him, holding his hand and looking immediately past the hostess toward the view beyond, was his 9-year-old daughter Zara, who was wearing a navy dress and the expression of a child who had just seen something through a floor-to-ceiling window that she was going to need several minutes to fully process. The view was the city, all of it, 42 floors up on a clear autumn evening. The entire geography of the place was visible, lit and continuous. The river catching the last of the light in the west, the grid of streets below reduced to pattern, the other buildings standing at their various heights, around them like an argument about what mattered. Zara was looking at all of it with both hands pressed flat against the glass, and the particular quality of stillness that meant something had reached her completely. Her father was looking at the hostess. His name was Nathan Cole. He did not have a reservation. He had not made one because the lounge on the 42nd floor of the Meridian Tower was not a thing he had thought of as requiring his reservation. Given that the Meridian Tower was a thing that required his ownership, he had bought it 6 years ago. Not the lounge specifically, not the top floor specifically, but the building, all 42 floors of it, through a real estate holdings company that carried a name other than his own, because that was how he organized his work and had organized it for the 11 years since he started building things that were too large to build without the specific anonymity that came from operating through holding companies and trusting the work to speak for itself. The lounge on the 42nd floor had been his idea. He had stood in the empty space during the building's renovation and looked out at the city through the unfinished windows and said to the architect standing beside him, "This should be where people come to see what they're living in." And they had built it that way. The architect had been excellent, and the result was this room, which sat on top of the building he owned and which he was now being asked to prove he had the right to enter. "I don't have a reservation," Nathan said. "We were in the building this evening, and my daughter wanted to see the view from up here." He nodded toward the windows, toward Zara still with her hands on the glass and the city spreading out beneath her. The hostess looked at Zara. She looked at Nathan. She looked at his jacket with the quick, barely perceptible assessment that people made when they were categorizing and did not want to appear to be categorizing. She said, "I understand, but Apex is a reservation-only venue. Without a booking, I'm not able to seat you this evening." She said it with the smooth, rehearsed finality of someone who had delivered this sentence many times and had optimized it to close conversations rather than open them. Nathan said, "Is there a manager on duty tonight?" The hostess said, "Our venue manager is attending to guests. I can pass along a message." Nathan said, "I'd prefer to speak with her directly if that's possible." Something in the hostess's expression adjusted. She said, "One moment," and stepped back slightly to make a call on her earpiece, her voice too low for Nathan to make out the words. Zara had turned from the window. She was looking at her father with the alert attention of a child who had registered a shift in the atmosphere and was assessing it. She said, "Are we allowed up here?" Nathan looked at her. He said, "We're going to find out." Zara looked at the hostess and then back at her father with the expression of a child who had filed the response and was reserving judgment on it. She turned back to the window. The city had not moved. The venue manager arrived from the interior of the lounge in approximately 3 minutes. She was in her mid-30s, precise in her dress and movement, with the composed authority of someone who ran a high-demand room and had developed strong instincts about what situations required. Her name tag read Simone. She came to the hostess stand and looked at Nathan and Zara with the full, even attention of someone who was doing the reading properly before she said anything, and Nathan noticed this as the first thing about her that was different from the hostess. "Good evening," Simone said. "I'm the venue manager. I understand you'd like to come in this evening without a reservation," Nathan said. "That's right. We're in the building tonight, and I wanted my daughter to see the city from up here." Simone looked at Zara. Zara was looking at Simone with the frank, unguarded assessment she applied to most adults she encountered for the first time. Simone said to her, "It's a good view, isn't it?" Zara said, "It's the best view I've ever seen." She said it with the complete sincerity of someone stating an objective fact rather than offering a compliment. Simone looked at Nathan. She said, "I want to be straightforward with you. We're at capacity this evening, and our policy requires reservations, which exist because the space genuinely cannot absorb walk-in traffic on busy nights." She paused. "This is a busy night," Nathan said. "I understand." He said it the way he said things when he meant it, directly and without performance. Simone looked at him for a moment. She said, "Are you in the building for an event?" Nathan said, "No, I have business here." He said nothing further. Simone held his gaze for a moment with the expression of someone who was sensing a gap between the available information and the full picture, and who was honest enough with herself to recognize the gap rather than paper over it. She said, "Can I ask your name?" Nathan said, "Nathan Cole." Something moved through Simone's expression. Not recognition, not yet, but the specific quality of a name landing with a different weight than expected, of a name sitting differently in the air than other names had sat. She said one moment and stepped back from the stand and spoke into her earpiece again, and this time Nathan could see from her face, from the quality of her listening, that the response she was receiving was substantially different from whatever she had expected. She ended the call. She stood for a moment that was shorter than it felt. Then she looked at Nathan with an expression that had cleared of everything managed and become something more direct and more honest. She said, "Mr. Cole, I owe you an apology. I wasn't aware." Nathan said, "I know you weren't." Simone said, "Please come in." She said it without theater and without the excess warmth that people deployed when they were trying to cover something with performance. She said it plainly, which was the right register for the moment, and Nathan noted that it was the right register and filed the information. They walked into the lounge. Zara walked in beside her father and stopped, after 4 steps, and stood completely still and looked at the room and then at the view and then at the room again, turning slowly with the expression of a child for whom a space has answered a question she did not know she was asking. The room was exactly as Nathan had intended it. The low, warm lighting that made the city outside the primary source of illumination in the evening. The arrangement of seating that drew people toward the glass rather than away from it. The bar along the interior wall that did not compete with the view, but supported the experience of it. The ceiling treatment that made the room feel higher than its dimensions warranted. Every element had been deliberate, and the deliberation had paid off, which he could see from the way Zara was standing in it with her mouth slightly open and her hands at her sides. She said, "Daddy," he said. "Yeah." She said, "Did you know it would be like this?" He thought about standing in the empty space 6 years ago with the architect, looking at the raw concrete and the unfinished windows and the city beyond them. He said, "I hoped it would be." She looked at the view for another moment. Then she looked at him. She said, "You hoped right." He put his hand on her shoulder. They found a table near the window, one of the corner positions that looked south and west simultaneously, and sat down together with the city spread out beneath them in all directions. Simone came to the table herself. She did not send a server. She sat down for a moment and looked at Nathan with the directness she had shown at the stand, which was the quality he had noticed and was still noticing. She said, "I need to understand something." "If you're willing," Nathan said, "go ahead." She said, "Did you come tonight to observe? Is this the kind of visit where I should be expecting a review?" Nathan looked at her. He said, "I came tonight because my daughter asked to see the city from somewhere high, and this was the highest place I could bring her to that I knew would be good." He looked at Zara, who was looking at the river catching the last of the western light. He said, "That's the only reason I came." Simone held his gaze. She said, "Then I need to tell you something separately from the professional context." He said, "Tell me." She said, What happened at the stand tonight was a policy being applied correctly by someone who was doing her job. But the way it felt when I watched it, when I came out and looked at you and your daughter standing there, it felt wrong before I knew who you were. She paused. I want you to know I noticed that. Nathan looked at her for a moment. He said, "What did you do with that?" She said, "I came to you directly instead of having her manage it. Because when something feels wrong, you address it directly." Nathan said, "That's the right answer." She said, "I know it is now. I want to make sure it would have been the right answer if your name hadn't turned out to be what it is." He looked at her steadily. He said, "That's the harder question," she said. "Yes, it is." They held that for a moment, the two of them. The harder question sitting on the table between them without a clean resolution. Because the harder question did not resolve cleanly, and pretending otherwise would have made it smaller than it was. Then Nathan said, "I'd like you to bring that question into the training process. Not as a policy addition, as a genuine question that the team sits with and discusses. What does it feel like when something is wrong before you know why? How do you act on that feeling when you don't have the authority or the context to override a policy?" He paused. "Those are worth 30 minutes of a staff meeting," Simone said. "I'll make it happen," he said. "I know you will." A server came and they ordered. Zara with the focused deliberation of a child who took menus seriously, and Nathan with the ease of someone who knew what he wanted. The server was good, attentive without hovering, present without performing, and Nathan noted this the way he noted things that were right. Zara had a hot chocolate that arrived with a small design in the foam that she examined with the seriousness of someone assessing craft work. She said, "Someone made this carefully." Nathan looked at it. He said, "They did." She said, "How do you make someone care about doing something carefully?" Nathan thought about this. It was the question behind most of the questions he had spent his career trying to answer. He said, "You build a place where carefulness is the standard, where people see it in the work around them and feel that their own carefulness is part of something that matters." Zara considered this while drinking her hot chocolate with appropriate care. She said, "Like how?" Nathan said. "Like the ceiling in this room." He looked up. "Someone spent a week on that ceiling. You probably haven't noticed it." Zara looked up at the ceiling. She had not noticed it. She looked at it now with the revised attention of someone who had been told that something she had missed was worth seeing. She said, "It makes the room feel taller." Nathan said, "That's exactly what it does," she said. "But it doesn't look like anything special." He said, "That's how you know it was done right. When something works and doesn't announce itself. When the effect is there and the effort is invisible." Zara looked at the ceiling for another moment, and then at the city, and then at her hot chocolate. She said, "I want to build things like that." Nathan looked at his daughter. He said, "What kind of things?" She said, "Things where the effort is invisible but the effect is real." He held her gaze. He said, "That's the best description of what I do that I've ever heard." She looked at him with the expression she wore when she was deciding whether she was being complimented or taken seriously. She decided on the latter, which was the correct interpretation. She returned to her hot chocolate. The evening settled into the particular quality that good evenings settled into, the quality of time passing without urgency, of a city spread out beneath you doing its continuous work, of a child and a father sitting in a room that was doing what it was supposed to do. Nathan looked at the room and looked at the city and looked at his daughter and felt the thing that had no efficient name. The specific satisfaction of a place being what it was meant to be in the presence of someone he loved. He thought about the night he had bought the building. He had been 35, and the building had been something other than what it was now, older in its bones and less certain of its purpose. And he had walked through it for 2 hours on a Saturday morning with a broker who kept trying to redirect his attention to different properties that were less complicated, less expensive, less demanding. And Nathan had kept coming back to this one, to the bones of it, to the 42nd floor empty space with the view that told you everything about the city you were in. He had bought it on a Tuesday. He had started the renovation planning on a Thursday. He had been operating at the edge of what was financially manageable, and he had done it anyway, because the alternative was to let someone else turn that view into something it shouldn't be, and he could not accept that. He had turned it into this, a room where people came to see what they were living in, the way he had said to the architect 6 years ago. A room where the ceiling was a week's work that no one noticed in a child's hut. Chocolate arrived with the design in the foam, and the city spread out 42 floors below and was available to everyone who came through the door, or almost everyone. That was the part he was going to have to address. Not Simone's management of the situation, which had been good once she was in it. Not the hostess's application of the policy, which had been technically correct. The part he was going to address was the gap between a policy designed to manage capacity and a policy experienced as a door that opened for certain people before it opened for others. He had seen that gap open. He had felt it from the inside. He was going to close it the way he closed every gap he found in the things he built, not with a memo and not with a new rule, but with the patient structural work of changing the conditions that produced it. He would call Simone in the week. He would ask her to map the decision points in the door policy, every moment where a judgment call replaced a procedure, and to bring that map to a conversation that included the hostess and the door team and herself. And they would look at it together and find the places where something other than capacity management was operating, and they would name those places directly, and then they would build something different in those places. That was the work. Not the event, but the response to the event. Not the night, but the week after. He had been doing this work for 11 years. He expected to do it for 11 more, and then 11 after that, because the work did not have an ending, only a direction, and the direction was always toward the thing, being more fully what it was meant to be than it was today. Zara finished her hot chocolate and looked at the empty cup with the expression of someone who had appreciated something and was acknowledging that appreciation through a final look before it was gone. She said, "Can we come back?" Nathan said, "Whenever you want," she said. "Can I bring Maya?" Maya was her best friend, who had not been to many places like this, and who Zara had a standing practice of including in good things when she encountered them. Nathan said, "We'll bring Maya." Zara said, "She's going to lose her mind when she sees the view." Nathan looked at the view. He thought about Maya losing her mind over the view. He thought about Simone's harder question. He thought about the ceiling that no one noticed, and the carefulness in the foam of a hot chocolate, and the city spread out below in all directions. Available and continuous, doing its constant work. He said, "I think she will." They left an hour later. The elevator came, and they got in, and the doors closed, and the 42nd floor disappeared above them, and the city descended alongside them as they dropped through the building's height. Zara watched the floor numbers and counted them under her breath. Not anxiously, but with the pleasure of a child who found descending from great heights to be a satisfying activity in its own right. In the lobby, Nathan stopped. He looked at the building from the inside, at the atrium and the marble and the height of the interior. Zara stopped beside him and looked up. She said, "It's really tall." He said, 42 floors. She looked at the top of the atrium and then at her father. She said, "And you built it?" He said, "With a lot of people?" "Yes." She said, "Did you always know it was going to be this tall?" He thought about the drawings, the elevations, the conversations about height and proportion, and what the building would look like from the street, and from across the river, and from the 42nd floor looking out. He said, "I knew what I wanted it to be." The height was part of that. Zara looked at the building for another moment. Then she looked at her father with the clear-eyed directness that was her signature quality, the thing that had been there since she was very small, and that he had never tried to diminish because it was the best thing about her. She said, "The people at the top didn't know you owned it." Nathan said, "No, they didn't." She said, "But you didn't get loud." He said, "No." She said, "Why not?" He thought about the answer that was true. He said, "Because getting loud would have been about me. And this evening was supposed to be about you." Zara looked at him for a long moment. She said, "It was about me." He said, "I know." She said, "Thank you, Daddy." He said, "You're welcome." "Baby!" They walked out through the lobby doors onto the street, father and daughter, into the night that the city was making of itself. Continuous and indifferent and full of buildings that stood at their various heights and held their various purposes and belonged to someone, though rarely to the person you would have guessed. Nathan Cole walked his daughter home through streets that carried no record of his name, and above them, 42 floors up, the room he had built was still doing what it had been built to do. The city spread out through its windows, available and real. The ceiling invisible and exactly right. The view belonging to everyone inside it for as long as they stayed. That was what he had built. That was all he had ever been trying to build, a room that held, a view that was available, a ceiling that worked without announcing itself. That was enough. That had always been exactly enough. The call to Simone happened on Wednesday morning. Nathan made it from his desk at 7:45, before the day had assembled itself into demands, in the specific window of quiet that he protected every morning for the things that required thought rather than reaction. Simone answered on the second ring. She said good morning in the tone of someone who had been expecting the call and had prepared for it. Not defensively, but thoroughly, in the way that thorough people prepared for things they knew were coming. He said, "I want to talk about the door policy," she said. "I've already started looking at it." He said, "Tell me what you found." She said, "The policy is written around capacity management. It does what it says it does. What it doesn't say is anything about how the judgment calls inside the policy get made. Who gets asked for a reservation confirmation before they've had a chance to say why they're there? Who gets the benefit of a question before they get the door?" Nathan said, "That's the gap." She said, "Yes, it's not in the policy. It's in the space between the policy and the person applying it. And the only way to address that is to name it directly in training rather than hoping it resolves itself through professionalism." Nathan said, "What does naming it look like?" Simone said, "It looks like a conversation. A real one, not a module with a quiz at the end. A conversation where the team sits with the question of what assumptions they bring to the door and where those assumptions come from and what it costs when they operate without examination." Nathan said, "Who leads it?" Simone said, "I do, but I want to bring someone in to support it, someone with more expertise in this than I have." Nathan said, "I can connect you with someone. Her name is Dr. Patricia Fields. She does this work with organizations across 3 sectors, and she's the best I've encountered." Simone said, "I'd appreciate that." Nathan said, "You'll have her contact by end of day." Simone said, "Thank you." She paused. "Can I ask you something?" He said, "Go ahead." She said, "When you walked off that elevator on Saturday and Emily stopped you before you had cleared the doors, what did you feel?" Nathan was quiet for a moment. He was not quiet because he did not know the answer. He was quiet because the answer was real, and real answers deserved a moment before being spoken. He said, "I felt the version of this I have felt in most rooms I have walked into for the past 40 years. The assessment before the greeting, the conclusion before the question." He paused. "What I felt after that was the specific quality of being in a place I built and being made to feel like a guest who had not been expected." Simone said, "I'm sorry." He said, "I know you are." He meant it without qualification. She said, "I want to make sure that what you felt on Saturday is the last time anyone feels that in that room." Nathan said, "That's the goal. Whether it's the last time is determined by the work." She said, "Then we do the work." He said, "Then we do the work." He ended the call and sat for a moment with his coffee and looked out his office window at the city, which was doing its morning assembling, the streets filling. The buildings catching the early light in the specific way that buildings caught early light when the angle was right, which was only for a short window in the morning and then it was gone. He thought about Zara saying the effort is invisible, but the effect is real. He had been turning that sentence over since Saturday evening, not because it surprised him, but because it had arrived in his daughter's voice with the specific clarity of a truth, stated by someone who had not yet learned to doubt it. He thought about the ceiling on the 42nd floor, the week's work that no one noticed. He thought about that week's work being done by a man named Paul, who had been in ceiling installation for 22 years, and who had looked at the specifications and then at the space and then at Nathan, and said, "I can do it right or I can do it fast." Nathan had said right without hesitation, without asking what right would cost. Paul had spent a week on it. Nobody noticed the ceiling. Everybody felt it. That was the work. That had always been the work. Not the thing that was seen, but the thing that was felt. Not the announcement, but the effect. Not the name on the building, but the quality of the room when you were inside it and the city was outside the window and the light was doing what he had designed it to do. He picked up his coffee. He looked at the city. Below him, somewhere in the grid of streets, a 9-year-old girl was on her way to school with the specific quality of someone who had seen the city from 42 floors up the previous Saturday and was still thinking about it, still turning it over, still sitting with the question of what it meant to build something where the effort was invisible but the effect was real. She would keep turning it over. He knew her well enough to know that.